Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark.
Mysterious Moments, Volume 3, Story Number 1. I'll share my experience. In 2003, I deployed to Iraq in part of the invasion. My platoon was tasked with guarding a mass grave site and destroyed Republican Guard vehicles. We took over an old salt factory. We had shifts with 4 locations for us to guard. We would rotate every few hours. One night, I was on the roof overlooking the grave site and vehicles. I was alone on the roof. I was looking through my night vision goggles, and all of a sudden something slapped me in the back of the head. I heard and felt it skin on skin. I jumped up and said, "All right, MFer, I wasn't sleeping." When I looked, there was no one there. I looked around, and there was no place for anyone to hide. I would have heard and seen them run. Then I stopped and realized I had felt skin on skin. The problem with that is that I was wearing my combat helmet as it was part of my uniform for guard. I pulled my night vision goggles off my face, and I could see a blue orb floating a few feet in front of me, and then it shot towards the door to the staircase. I didn't say anything to anyone. The guy that came to relieve me only lasted 30 minutes up there. He came down the stairs screaming, saying something grabbed his arm and pulled his goggles from his hand, and all he saw was a blue orb fly away. So I told him my story, and he said he would never go back up there. We left that place a week later. Story number 2. I used to live in a studio with my mother about 6 years ago. Since the place was small, we slept together. One night, after living there for about 2.5 years, we experienced something that I still remember today. And well, I still have a hard time sleeping at night by myself or with the lights off. I actually sleep with my bathroom light on. Anyway, back to the story. One night, I came tired from school. I fell asleep probably by 9 p.m. My mother would smoke cigarettes and spoke with our neighbor nightly. She'd always be in bed by 12 or 1 a.m. Well, between the hours of 2 to 4 a.m., she got her feet and legs touched while I got both of my feet yanked. An experience that has left me until today traumatized. I looked at nothing in the dark, trying to make out an image, and there was nothing. I remember screaming and asking my mom to turn on the lights, and she was and is still a believer of the paranormal. So she screamed back at me to start praying and go back to sleep. To be honest, we didn't speak about it until a year after we moved out of that place. I personally only had that experience. The place felt off most of the time, especially where the kitchen stood. I always got this feeling I was being stared at, but by nothing. While my mom had plenty of other stories to tell about that place, this one is mine. Next story. In 2004, I was a merchant marine midshipman at a state maritime academy. I was scheduled to relieve the 0400 to 0800 quarterdeck security post. I woke up about 25 minutes early to put on my uniform and give myself enough time to walk from the barracks to the pier and eventually the ship. I was getting ready in the dark as not to bother or wake my roommate up, as he had an exam later that morning. When I was at my closet taking out my uniform, I felt someone grab the back of my head and push me toward the door. I figured my roommate was being a wise ass, so I yelled at him to quit it and put on the lights. The room was empty, and the door was locked. I found out later that my roommate had snuck out to study in one of the computer labs after lights out so he would not wake me before watch. I was startled. Something had definitely grabbed the back of my neck and head and pushed me with force toward the door. Not wanting to deal with whatever was in the room, I grabbed my shoes, got dressed in the passageway, and very quickly made my way to relieve the watch. That was the first time I ever experienced anything in that building. After that, I would periodically get eerie feelings when walking in the passageway or sitting in my room alone, but never anything physical after that first incident. Next story. This happened a couple of years ago. I worked at a zoo in my hometown. It's a pretty nice zoo, and we're pretty popular. And we have a pretty impressive selection of animals: lions, tigers, rhinos, but also red panda, red river hogs, Victorian pigeons, wallabies, and more. One of my favorite attractions is this big indoor aviary where guests can walk through. We have all kinds of birds, some tortoises, a turtle, and even an iguana in there who have pretty interesting personalities. Recently, there have been some strange occurrences, though. I'm not sure when it started, but the oldest story I heard about was that one of the keepers was in the morning replacing the feeding stations for the birds. He said he started hearing something strange. It sounded like some kind of socializing, but like none he had ever heard. He's worked there for ages and basically raised some of the birds, so he knows them pretty well. It's kind of scary how accurate he can be. He was able to determine the calls were coming from on top of an artificial rock thing where we hide some equipment and controls for the building. None of the birds go up there because they're afraid of the motor for the waterfall. Unsurprisingly, when he went up there, he found nothing. Lots of the night guards have heard things in there, and two have seen very tall figures standing up in this area. One guard said he was sitting just outside and heard the sounds. He went in worried one of the birds was hurt because it sounded really strange. Once inside, he went into this artificial cave that we have under the rock thing, and he can hear light steps on top. He slowly stepped out with his taser, looking up there, and he said he saw a figure, maybe 5 feet tall, humanoid, and it stared out over the aviary, looking down, and it would had a hunched posture. He said it didn't see him, but he left and called the cops. They searched the buildings, then the whole zoo, and nothing. The second guard had a similar experience, but this time the thing did seem to see her, and there were two of them this time. Apparently, they threw something like a rock at her, but she couldn't find what it was that they tossed at her. Unfortunately, and much to many of the staff's frustration, for other reasons besides paranormal, the zoo has yet to set up any cameras in the building. But one of the cameras that are outside has picked up the sound once when it was particularly loud. Unfortunately, I'm just an admission staff, so I don't have access to those cameras. But as we move into the off season, the encounters have become so common the administration is taking notice. Our own CEO heard it. Recently, there have been several items thrown at staff and guests. A bird was found dead like something squeezed it to death. It was horrible, especially since the bird was such a sweet and well-known little fellow. And also the sounds, lots of sounds. I know there are more, but it would take too long to list them. I've had two experiences. My first was pretty basic. As I heard the vocalization, it was really strange and very loud. The scariest part was how all the birds went dead silent, and the ground birds all went and hid. They weren't afraid of loud sounds normally, so that kind of freaked me out. The next was more interesting. I was walking through early in the morning, and I got to the enclosure where we hold the iguana. Our iguana is pretty old and a pretty chill animal who has been at the zoo his whole life. He is such a sweet little animal, and I love him to death. His enclosure is pretty open, as the only separation is this sturdy net over some bars, and it keeps the birds from picking on him mostly. I walked over, and the section of the net that is against the rock thing is being stretched up and on into the foliage, like someone was trying to rip it off the top. I can't see what's pulling it, and when I hollered asking who's up there, it sprang back and there was no sound. I radioed security and waited, but there was no one to come to see who was up there, and if they tried to get down, or in the unlikely event, up. Security arrived, then they looked around. We checked on the iguana, and he was a bit stressed but seemed no worse for wear. Incidences are still going on. Actually, sometimes we've even had a metal shelf drop off the top, so there's definitely something happening in there. Next story. I'm a biologist for a zoo in the United States. I've been with this institution for about 5 years now. I won't disclose exactly which one it is. All I can say is that it's one of the major parks. I've been told stories from some of the senior staff and from the security staff who I've known for years now, and I can say they are level-headed, rational individuals. I never paid much attention to these stories, as I hadn't experienced any until recently, and I can say for certain that what I've experienced has no rational explanation. I'll start with some of the history of the park and some of the stories I've been told by the security staff. Then I'll move on and share my own experiences. One of the unusual occurrences described by the security staff is there is a lady that appears in the park in the middle of the night and begins to scream. They call her the Red Lady, due to her red dress. Apparently, when they hear her scream now at night, they don't even bother to go check because of how often it occurs. As to her origins, I do have a few theories. A few decades ago, where the now existing tiger facility sits, there were bird aviaries. A lady had gone back behind them and shot herself, taking her own life. Now, as to the validity of that story, I can't verify it as I have never been able to find any literature on it, but there is one that I can verify to be true. A few years ago, a call came over the radio from security instructing us not to comment on the body that's being pulled from the lake. I had no idea what was going on, and I never heard them comment about it again to us, but saw it all over the news the next day. I should probably point out that the zoo sits inside a large area of land that was originally set aside as a reservation for some Indian tribes. Apparently, right outside in the zoo and one of the surrounding lakes, a human body had been found. The firefighters said that they, quote, weren't sure exactly how long the person had been in the water. As for who it was or what happened, I'm not sure. The circumstances were surely strange, and what made it even weirder is the lack of media coverage afterwards. No one ever talked about it again, and whenever I've mentioned it, no one seems to want to talk about it. Now, on to my eye-opening experience. Some time ago, I was offsite doing a presentation on North American vipers late at night. My superior and I had brought some vipers to the presentation in display cases. After the presentation, we were headed back to the zoo, and when we were on the back roads inside the park, we noticed one of our tires was flat, so we stopped. While my superior was assessing the tire, I noticed a toad crossing the road. I watched as the toad hopped along. That's when I looked across the road, over into a dense tree line. I immediately locked eyes with a woman who was peering at us from within the tree line. I couldn't see what she was wearing. All I could see was her face with the amount of foliage. She made no facial expressions or any gesture towards us. She just stood there, motionless, looking back at me. This lasted for about 10 seconds. As my superior finished assessing the tire, he started to come around the side of the car. As he did that, this lady with inhuman speed darted sideways, disappearing into the tree line. She didn't turn and run like a normal person. She literally just moved sideways. There was only myself, my superior, and two security guards in the park at the time, and that I'm certain of. As that happened, my heart skipped a beat. It was so fast. I don't think my superior saw it. I asked him if he saw that, and he just casually made a comment about the toad. He then instructed me to get back in the car, which I did. As we continued through, I called for security to let them know what I had seen, but I got no answer. I called them repeatedly, until one finally answered. It's unlike them not to answer, but I brushed it off. They reassured me no one was inside the park except for us. After I put the animals back, me and my superiors split up for the night. I was heading towards the back, and I for the first time heard the Red Lady scream, with my own ears. It was a hysterical banshee-like human scream, clear as day, just up the trail, very close. It was no animal. I called security, and they immediately answered. They told me again not to worry, no one's in the park, and to have a good night. It all seemed too casual to me. I will never forget what I saw on the tree line that night, and I will never forget the scream. Next story. Okay, I'm going to give you some background information before I really get into the experiences I've had here. I work security. Started out with overnights and now mostly work second shift, which is 2 to 10. The site I work at is an upscale neighborhood where seeing Lamborghinis and Bugattis are commonplace. Anyway, there are three main buildings we have to walk through and lock up, one of which is a huge country club. My older brother used to work here and told me weird things go down here at night, but I needed the work, so I went for it. The clubhouse gives off a vibe like you're not supposed to be in there. Like as I was doing my walkthrough, it felt like I was being followed or I was being watched, which is creepy enough as it is, never mind the fact that it's built to look old and rustic. There's a particular long hallway inside that a lot of the other guards aren't keen about going down. I usually just turned the lights on and did what I needed to do. One particular night, as I was going to turn the lights on in the hallway, I could see a silhouette of a person just standing there in the middle of the hallway, blacker than black in the darkness. I felt an extreme sense of foreboding and just dread, like if I took any step closer, something really bad was going to happen. What did I do? I got the hell out of Dodge. This is actually my last week there because I found another job. But now, I don't do walkthroughs in there anymore. Come to find out, I'm not the only one that's had an experience in there. Not surprised. Next story. So, I was helping this lady write a resume oriented towards getting work as a night watch security. She had plenty of experience, and she said she preferred building patrolling on night shifts, with the caveat that she refused any job working nights at the Minneapolis Armory. This beautiful old auditorium in downtown Minneapolis was done up in 1930s federal style Art Deco. The Dead Kennedys played there on tour in the early 1980s. The Armory played host to other events occasionally, but it spent decades empty, gorgeous and historical, decaying and unused. Prince made a stir a few years before he died because he signed on to buy and restore the White Elephant property. So this major security company had the contract to patrol the property, watch out for incursions of copper plumbing thieves, squatters, vandals, and junkies. The security lady was newly hired early in her career and was assigned solo night patrol at the armory. It was creepy enough walking the poorly lit corridors all alone, sweeping the auditorium with her flashlight, but every so often patrolling upper floors, she would hear a woman's blood-curdling scream in the middle of the night. It would be muffled quite a bit by the intervening floors, a fact which underlied its ear-splitting volume at its source, so much that it would still be audible upstairs. The first time this happened was the worst. The new guard reported it to base and kept in walkie-talkie contact as she circled the grounds and parking lots. Although the scream sounded like it had come through the floor, she imagined it must have been a woman getting assaulted, kidnapped, or murdered outside. At that time, there were no bars or nightclubs open within many blocks. The patrol outside showed no sign of any living person, no peep of noise from bargoers or night roving homeless. The part of downtown around the armory was a ghost town in many ways. No signs of entry or exit anywhere around the building either. All doors and windows intact, locked, blocked, and or barred. So the guard went back inside to check the basement. Base was disconcertingly blasé as she reported in on the walkie. They approved her action. She thought crackheads might have broken in there and one was being assaulted by the others. Of all the areas in the armory she had to patrol, she hated the basement most of all. The basement was a musty labyrinth of cramped corridors filled with stained, asbestos-wrapped pipes running along the low ceilings. There was absolutely no trace of anyone down there. Base wasn't surprised and gave her crackling, staticky approval to stay watchful, but continue her patrol duty upstairs the rest of the night. When that happens, it usually happens only once, and then it quiets the rest of the ship, said Base. The basement scream happened again every few weeks. The guard did a due diligence investigation of the lower depth each time, but she never found anything. A different assignment finally opened up, and after 6 months of the armory, she was ecstatic to transfer to a boring watch of a normal office building across town. On her last night at the armory, Base told her how impressed the supervisor was that she stuck it out for 6 months. Of all the security officers in the company, she, the only woman guard in that cohort, had braved the notorious assignment the longest. Next story. I used to work as a security guard, but that was like 7 years ago. It was on a warehouse site, and definitely there was some odd activity there. One time on a perimeter check, I was called on to check out an outbuilding whose CCTV camera has suddenly stopped working. I investigated, and the camera in question was located at the top of a stairwell, and it apparently turned back on by itself as I reached the top of the stairs. I returned to my checks, and on the way out heard footsteps on the stairs, so I went back to look and radioed it in, and no one was seen on the CCTV cameras. Another time, some mag-locked fire doors slammed open by themselves for weeks, tripping the intruder alarm. When checked and relocked, they were impossible to open unless the fire system activated. The scariest moment was on an exterior perimeter check at 2 a.m., walking down in pitch darkness between two very long buildings, and suddenly seeing something peep around the corner in the middle distance. There was a camera literally a shot of it, and nothing was seen. Next story. I worked as a water treatment plant operator up until February of this year. I worked second shifts and some third shifts. The job was enjoyable, interesting, and fun. However, there were some shifts that, when you immediately walked into the plant, there was a foreboding feeling. The operator station was an all-glass office overlooking all the interior plant operations, and there was a door leading to a catwalk. I sat at a monitoring station when not in the lab or the kitchen living area. There were plenty of nights where it felt like you were being watched, where you couldn't shake that feeling the whole night. You had to do water tests every 2 hours, which required you to go down into the plant on the nights where it felt like I was being watched. I would always see something dark out of the corner of my eyes. It would scurry behind corners or up on the catwalk. I had doors slam on me that led into chemical rooms. These were huge steel doors that would require a man to put some real force behind to make them slam. The overwhelming feeling of being watched would be so intense that I'd say out loud, "Just checking the water, not doing anything bad." I'm a pretty logical guy, and I've tried putting a logical explanation to this, and I can't. I've never been into the paranormal until these occurrences started to happen. A few of my co-workers had said they had seen a darker than dark shadow on the docks, and it looked like it was just sitting. One had gone down to check, and there was nothing there, yet the other operator could see it on the camera. There was another instance while I was sitting at the monitoring station, something knocked on one of the glass panels. I thought it was the plant superintendent messing with me, since he stated he was swinging by. Wasn't him. He showed up 20 minutes later. Anyhow, I know that there's something in there. The plant has doors with key codes to get in, and the whole plant property was gated with security access. I never believed in any of this prior to working at this water plant, but not anymore. Next story. I've been working as a security guard at a famous nightclub here in Baja for over a year, and me and my co-workers have experienced a lot of strange phenomena over time, and I want to share these stories with you. First, a little bit of context about this place. Although the building is not old, the business has been around for more than 40 years. It was relocated to where it's now from another building right in front. The new building has three sections: a canteen on the first floor, a nightclub on the second floor, and an adjacent area that used to be a nightclub too, but plays different music. It's currently used as a storage facility. Things have happened to me. Sometimes I work two shifts, and on my first day, which is day shift, I went upstairs from the cantina to the nightclub to use the bathroom more privately. It was very dark. All I could feel was the sensation of being watched. Very eerie. The atmosphere felt very heavy. Over the months, I noticed that it's not always the same. On one occasion, I was also upstairs on the nightclub replacing some old "don't smoke" signs. When I was walking towards one of them near the bathroom, the old sign flew in the air like someone ripped it from the wall, threw it towards me, and I just went the other way and opened the curtains to let the sunlight in because I was so scared. Only the emergency lights were on. On another occasion, I was doing my rounds at a similar time. I shone my flashlight towards the bathroom and saw someone going inside. So I followed thinking it was a coworker, but no one was there. One other time I was in the back office, which has the door that leads to the abandoned section, the unused nightclub. I was picking my radio and some gear, and when I was leaving, I heard a voice saying, in Spanish, Don't leave, I'm scared, coming from across the door. This time it was nighttime. Again, I pointed my flashlight to the room, thinking it was a coworker, but no one was there. Now, these are the things that my coworkers have told me. One of them said that when he was working the graveyard shift with a partner, a heavy set of tables that were stacked just were thrown out of nowhere. Another coworker was pushed when going down a stairway and injured his ankle badly. This was caught on video, I believe. He never returned to work after that. A lot of coworkers have reported to hear a female voice saying, "Hey," near one of the offices, as if a girl was trying to get their attention. Others have reported hearing the bathroom stall doors being opened one by one, or someone pushing the doors, preventing them to open the stall where they are doing their business. There have been reports of smoke forming out of thin air, kids giggling, and things like that. On one occasion, someone saw a girl through the cameras clear as day behind one of the counters, as if she was working, looking for something. This was after hours and no one was there. There have been reports of activity on the cantina too, like stools being thrown and orbs and faces caught on the security cameras. Other friends that work in the old building, it was bought by another nightclub, have told me that they have felt their butts touched by someone while they are washing their hands in the ladies' room, and sometimes seeing a pair of disembodied legs. What can I say? It's hard to believe that this place isn't haunted. Next story. My grandmother once told me about something very strange that happened to her. It was afternoon, 3 p.m. She lived in the ground floor and my aunt lived on the second floor. She would always come down and have a chat with my grandmother often, and she had a key to the house. She remembered she had a slight headache and she slept in the living room on her couch. After a few minutes, she was half awake when she heard the door open. As my aunt would often come by, she assumed it was her. She said it was a warm hand which touched her forehead and said, "Are you sick?" And my grandmother just said, "Hmm." After a few moments, my grandmother realized that my aunt wasn't in town since the last 3 days. She opened her eyes slightly just to see who it was, and she saw a woman wearing a red dress sitting on the chair and looking at her. But as soon as she opened her eyes, the woman faded away. Next story. So, I got a job as an overnight security guard at a hospital. It's a solid job with decent pay. I pretty much get paid to sit on my phone and every hour or so do a round of the hospital. The inside rounds are fine, except for one wing of the hospital. It's a newer wing, but for whatever reason, whenever I enter and walk through that wing, a sense of panic flushes over me, and I'm pretty much immediately enveloped by fear and dread. The environment seems to react around me. For example, I'll open a door and something inside that room will fall, or I'll go into a maintenance room and a generator will kick on, etc. Now, when I started, no one really talked about whether it was haunted or not, but I started working alone, and I felt anxious and dread whenever I entered that wing of the hospital. Obviously, I'm too nervous to ask around about it. The best way I can describe it is the feeling of you're being watched by something or someone that is slowly creeping up on you, and every step you make, it very slowly is getting closer to you. My boss, when I kind of had jokingly told him about it, told me that the person before them also saw some spooky stuff. Currently, the only thing I've seen is a head that poked around a couple of corners to watch me. After that, every time I go into that wing, the feeling of anxiety and dread gets worse and worse by the minute, and I hate to find out what's causing it. Next story. In 2020, I moved over 6 hours away from my hometown in southern Ontario to attend university up north. I moved into my dorm with my best friend from high school who I had known for years. In this building, it's important to note that it's been around since the school was first built. However, it's frequently been renovated and worked on because it's more often than normal catches fire. More details later. So, to set the scene, it's 2020, mid pandemic, and I had just been discharged from the Army. My best friend and I had applied for the same university major and had decided that if we got in, that we would live together. Well, sure enough, we got in, and the only dorm that could accommodate our room request i.e., moving into the same apartment with separate bedrooms, was situated directly across from a hospice. And for those that don't know what a hospice is, it's a medical facility where people go when they are close to death to live out the end of their lives in as much comfort as possible. This hospice was the only view out of our small windows and was the only one in our area. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the building frequently caught fire, but what was odd and worth mentioning about it was that it only caught fire in apartment number 5 on any given floor. My best friend and I lived on the 5th floor in the 5th apartment for 2 years, even throughout the summer, and fortunately, we never had a fire, but frequently found ourselves having to accommodate firefighters and other workers entering our rooms due to smoke and water damage from various different fires from random floors directly above us. Along with my friend, I had 2 other roommates who were very vocal about when they were home or not. We had a group chat, and for all these experiences, they were never home, or even in the city for that matter. My friend and I both got jobs working at a level 1 trauma center as night shift security, and thus paranormal stuff didn't scare us as we frequently were forced to work in the morgue and even witness people die on a daily basis, with whole bunches of other things happening. The main experience that happened early on was when my friend and I both awoke to hear someone going through our cupboards and garbage in the kitchen, which was right against my bedroom wall, thus making it super loud. It was about 1 p.m., and because we were on night shift, it was our version of 1 a.m. So, thinking that my friend had gotten up super early, I went to talk to her, but when I opened my door, there was no one there. I woke her up quietly and we searched the entire apartment and hallways with whatever we could use as weapons. There was no one, but everything was open: our fridge, the oven, drawers, and cabinets. As well, our garbage had been thrown across the room. All the breakers in our apartment had been switched off as well, which we didn't discover at first. It's important to mention that the only entry into our apartment, that being the front door, automatically locked when closed, so it was most definitely locked 24/7. I called building security, and no one had been seen on camera entering our dorm except for my friend and me around 8 a.m. after we had gotten off work at the hospital. There was no explanation for who had done this, but still, they took our statements and said they'd do patrols, but they never found more information. Over 3 months later, it was summer. My friend and I had been 2 of 11 people left in the building over the summer, with the rest being mostly just international students who could afford to do quarantine protocols again in September, as it took 2 weeks. We were the only ones on our floor, but regularly heard stomping outside in the hall, but neither of us ever saw anyone through our peephole, or even when we often heard knocks on the front door. However, when we checked, there was no one there each and every time. So aside from the knocking and stomping, it was a super quiet summer except for one morning. I'll never forget because it shook us to the bone. It was 10 a.m. and my roommate and I were asleep after work. I never locked my bedroom door, as my friend loved to come in and hang all the time, but for some reason, I locked it that entire week. And good thing too, because I awoke to frantic, and I mean frantic knocking. No pounding on my bedroom door. I was obviously super disoriented as I had just finished a 12-hour shift a few hours earlier, but I saw 2 dark shadows under the door resembling feet. I figured my friend needed something and woke up, but I called out before getting up because I was annoyed to be awake this early. The feet stayed unmoving, but the knocking stopped. With a heavy sigh, I got up, threw on a sweater, and checked the time. It was around 10 a.m. I went to open the door, with the shadow still there. I assumed it was my friend. When I put my hand on the handle to unlock it, I heard a thud, and then, worried that my friend had fallen, I threw the door open to see my front door closing as if someone was just leaving. I ran over and saw a completely black figure turn the corner. I followed, my security guard instincts kicking in, but when I turned the corner, there was nothing. I went back and my roommate asked why I was knocking on the walls like that. She heard it from inside my room on an adjoining shared wall to both our bedrooms. We again called security, but only I was seen chasing after nothing on the cameras. After my boyfriend, a firefighter, started sleeping over frequently because we were both spooked, the fire stopped. and most other things did too. We never had another incident on this level. We moved out after 2 years there, and beyond hearing the usual bangs, no other issues. Also, I wanted to add that we had an anti break in security stick against our front door while we slept, and they were conveniently moved into the living room or against the wall after these events. We also tested the stick to see if it actually worked, and trust me, even my firefighter boyfriend and his friend couldn't force their way in.